Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your Master of Fun and Wonder, your Chancellor of Cheerfulness, your Archduke of Banterbury, and as John Campion once called me, your existential Mr. Rogers. And thanks to that, and thanks to Zevius on Twitter, who did this fantastic artwork of me with a Galileo shuttlecraft, I have to say, wow, a painting of Rigel with me as your existential Mr. Rogers. What more could anyone possibly want in this life? Welcome, everyone. This is Robservations, episode number 383. Once again, I am your host, Robert Meyer Burnett, and this is Robservations. And you are imagination connoisseurs, and you are members of the Post-Geek Singularity, listening to me Robcast from the Robservatory. I feel like Hard Harry from Pump Up the Volume or something. Maybe I could do that. Everybody knows. No, I won't do that. I won't pretend I'm characters from late 80s, early 90s movies, because what good would that do any of us? Although I will say that Heathers and Pump Up the Volume are particular favorites of mine, both starring Christian Slater, who I'm a huge fan of, by the way. And I loved seeing him in Mr. Robot and all of that. But, ladies and gentlemen, you know what? I think today is going to be a fairly cheerful show. I got good letters. I got some stories. I got a little bit of politics. I'm going to warn you, I'm going to get a little political today. I was feeling it. But political with a story time bent to it. And I thought that would be pretty interesting. But first, the Chancellor of Cheerfulness, me, I got to start out and I got to talk to you about something that, man, sort of, I'd seen the trailers for this and I'd be like, what is this? Then I did a little bit of research and then I decided, wow, we're going to watch this because it just dropped recently. I'm talking about Amazon's new series, Tales from the Loop. A lot of you might be saying, well, what the hell is that? What is Tales from the Loop? For those of you who don't know, Tales from the Loop is a new 8-episode anthology series from Amazon that is actually based on a Swedish artist. His name is Simon, and I mean, Stubble McShave is going to kill me. I'm going to hear it from everybody. I'm telling you. But his name is Simon Stalenhag? I'm sure I'm not Stalenhag. I don't know how to pronounce that word. But Simon Stalenhag's art. It comes from his art. And his art portrays an alternate 80s. Here's an example. I will show you an example of his art. Here's an example of his art where he shows us an alternate sort of a 1980s that has, it's whimsical, it's lyrical, it's beautiful. I guess, I mean, in a way, maybe it could be the European Stranger Things. But, like, if you get close in, like, here's more detail of his artwork, of this robot. And his art is, I think, just, it's really amazing. And I was really unfamiliar with his artwork before this show, and I did some research into him. And In the Loop takes place, originally his stories, well, they weren't really stories, but they're images, and they were set in sort of more of a countryside of Sweden, and they would combine sci-fi imagery with the mundane and real life and things like that. And then there was also a role-playing game created of his art. I mean, his artwork inspired, sorry, I didn't mean to zip through so quickly. His artwork inspired a role-playing game, and I figured that would sort of explain the setting. Now, they have moved in the show, they have moved the setting from Sweden to Ohio. And it takes place in the 1980s, or maybe it's ambiguous, but there is 80s technology that we have evidenced. And the show, it tells us different stories about different characters. Some are recurring, some are not, in the town. And the whole town is known as, it's Mercer, Ohio in the show, but it's known as The Loop. And let me just read an article here about the video game. And the video game, pardon me. It's not a video game. It's a role-playing game. Tales from the Loop, role-playing in the 80s that never was. In 1954, the Swedish government ordered the construction of the world's largest particle accelerator. The facility was completed in 1969, located deep beneath the pastoral countryside of, again, I can't pronounce Swedish words, Malaborana. The local population called this marvel of technology the Loop. Acclaimed sci-fi artist Simon Stålenhag's paintings of Swedish 1980s suburbia, populated by fantastic machines and strange beasts, have spread like wildfire on the internet. Stålenhag's portrayal of a childhood against a backdrop of old Volvo cars and coveralls, combined with strange and mythical machines, creates a unique atmosphere that is both instantly recognizable and utterly alien. Now, for the first time, you will get the chance to step into the amazing world of the Loop. In this game, you play the teenagers in the late 80s, solving mysteries connected to the Loop. Choose between character types such as the bookworm, the troublemaker, the popular kid, and the weirdo. Everyday life is full of nagging parents, never-ending homework, and classmates bullying and being bullied. The mysteries let the characters encounter the strange machines and weird creatures that have come to haunt the countryside after the Loop was built. The kids get to escape their everyday problems and be part of something meaningful and magical, but also dangerous. And then this goes on and talks about the core rule book. And the U.S. setting text is written by the award-winning game writer and author Matt Forbeck. And there are trailers here, and you can see where the game came from. So it's very interesting that this series was spawned from first artwork that later became a role-playing game. Here, I'm going to put this in the live chat so you can click on these links, which I think are very, very cool. Now, the first episode, I haven't watched all the episodes yet. I just jumped into it. First of all, the opening episode makes a reference to Monica in the Summer, which is an early Ingmar Bergman movie, and it's playing in the theater, which I thought was pretty cool. I mean, it's not like a reference in Gremlins like A Boy's Life and Watch the Skies, which everyone knows was Close Encounters in E.T., but the fact that it referenced a Bergman movie that had to deal with a love affair that ends where a woman walks out on a man, it's just all very interesting. I thought the show is so beautifully made. And it's so just gorgeous to look at, and so far the performances are great. Jonathan Pryce is sort of the narrator. He opens up the series, and he's a recurring character in the show. This is my kind of science fiction, and I'm watching this, and the way it's directed, photographed, the music, it just is so evocative. It just creates a mood and certainly casts a spell if you're open to it. I mean, certainly there's an element of whimsy to it. There's an element, a little bit of steampunk. Obviously, it is set in the 80s. So, I mean, I don't think, whereas Stranger Things obviously has sci-fi elements, Stranger Things is very American. Well, imagine this is more of a Swedish Stranger Things, even though it's set in America. It's very lyrical and feels like it's set in Europe. And it's just a beautiful show. And I think after watching certain other science fiction shows lately on television or streaming, have let me down, I was very captivated by this from the very beginning. And while the first episode might not be, it might be somewhat, it's not the most surprising thing in the world, but the way it unfolds, there's a melancholy to it. There's emotion to it. It was just wonderful to find yourself immersed in it. And I really give credit to Amazon and all of the creators of this show for making something that is, I thought, particularly wonderful. What a great way. Talk about thinking out of the box. I mean, if you start looking at this artist's work, it's so evocative, and it's just so. I've always loved when you have the fantastical coupled with the mundane. There's something amazing about it. But what it really does is it taps into something that I particularly enjoy, which is this idea that there's awe and wonder all around us. That while these paintings obviously put there's even a robot in the first episode that looks evocative of something from, well, Robotech or Macross that those of you who are fans would recognize, like, oh, look at that. And there's just, it was wonderful. It was just, it really, I mean, is it perfect? Probably not, but it's such a unique take, and it's so wonderful to just watch and enjoy and immerse yourself in. And there is wonder in it. And there's some awesome, very subtle, well, not necessarily subtle, but there's even in the first episode, I don't want to ruin it, but there's a scene where something we're all very familiar with is taken apart. It's in you can see a shot of it in the trailer, so I'll tell you what it is. It's a house. It's, a family's house that is being taken apart and sucked up into the air. And the effects shot and the way it's done, it's so beautifully designed. And it was so nice to once again see there's clearly a vision and authorship at work in this show. And it takes such a great inspiration from its source material. And it's just a wonder to behold. And I really, really, really just really enjoyed it. I can't recommend it highly enough. It's on Amazon right now, and it's really great. And Tales from the Loop, it is a very, very great show, I think. And I think you should all watch it. I think if you're an imagination connoisseur, you will quite enjoy it because it's delightful. It is delightful. At least I thought it was delightful. Now, so I, like all of us, watching what happened or what's been going on in the country. I don't know if anyone watched Trump's broadcast yesterday, but I'm not gonna get into that. But there is one story that has been fascinating me about current events. And I have been watching it, and I've been reading it, and it's very interesting. And that is the story of Captain Bret Crozier. Who is Captain Bret Crozier, you might ask? Captain Bret Crozier was the skipper. He was the captain of the USS Theodore Roosevelt, CVN 71, an aircraft carrier. And he was removed from his command of the aircraft carrier a couple days ago for going outside of the chain of command by writing a letter that was not necessarily supposed to be leaked to the press, but it was gotten hold of by the press in San Francisco. And what happened was there was a coronavirus outbreak on his carrier, and he was not able to get the response he felt his men deserved, the men and women under his command deserved. So he went outside of the chain of command and wrote a letter hoping to get a quicker response. Now, I've never been in the military, but I have read enough and I've seen enough movies to know that discipline and following the chain of command in our military is essential. It is one of the cornerstones, one of the foundational principles of our military, the foundational organizing principles of our military. And to go outside of the chain of command is verboten. You're not supposed to do this. And it can bring, it undermines the very basis. The chain of command is essential to making sure that we have operational readiness and operational ability during times of conflict and even also in peacetime. So the controversy came, Captain Crozier was removed from office, removed from his command because, well, I'll get into that in a minute. I want to read this article, but the U.S. Naval Institute published an article about this because what I found most interesting about this story is that the old adage, those who do not learn from history are destined to repeat history. Well, Captain Crozier is he's captain of the USS Theodore Roosevelt. Well, Teddy Roosevelt did something very similar back when he was also in the military. And I can't help but think that Captain Crozier was thinking about the very man his boat was named after when he did this. And that's why I chose to tell this story, because every person has a story to tell you have yet to hear. And many men, especially many military men, have taken inspiration from military leaders in the past in order to inform their actions in the present. And again, I know that because of movies, of course. And all movies are real, right? I mean, certainly Patton thought he was reincarnated. And as I'm reading about this article, I can't help but think of A Few Good Men. And you can't... Some of my favorite movies are all about the military. And I've never been in the military myself. My father was in World War II. He was in the military. Obviously, I've been working in crisis medicine with my friend Mike Schertz, who was 18 Delta. He was Special Forces. But I have never been in the military. But I wanted to share this article from the U.S. Naval Institute. And because I thought it was definitely worth sharing. Because it's interesting. And I want to read not just the article, but some of the commentary afterwards from people that know a lot more about this than I do. So here we go. This is by Commander Ward Carroll, U.S. Navy, retired. And this was published, it just says April 2020, so it was published sometime in the last couple days. As reported by USNI, remember this is from the USNavalInstitute.org. That's where I found this. As reported by USNI News, Captain Bret Crozier was recently relieved of command of the USS Theodore Roosevelt by Acting Secretary of the Navy Thomas Maudley for showing extremely poor judgment while attempting to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 among the 4,800 members of his crew. By the way, as of today, there are now 137 members of that crew, including Captain Crozier himself, who have tested positive for coronavirus. By Acting Secretary of the Navy Thomas Maudley for showing extremely poor judgment while attempting to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 among the 4,800 members of his crew. According to Maudley, Crozier allowed the letter he wrote to his chain of command, which outlines his view of the problem the ship faces and the immediate support he requires to deal with it, to reach informal channels by sending an email out, quote, pretty broadly. While not sent directly from Crozier, a copy of the letter ultimately fell into the hands of a reporter from the San Francisco Chronicle, where it was published to wide national interest. So Crozier, I want to point out, did not send his letter directly to the press, which is part of the story I'm going to read as part of this article. Maudley's firing of Crozier has raised criticism across the mainstream and social media, with many claiming Crozier's leaking of the letter put the spurs to an unresponsive chain of command and ultimately saved lives, and that Maudley fired the commanding officer because he embarrassed high-ranking officials. Maudley has responded to that criticism by stating that Crozier's actions actually slowed down a process that was already in motion and induced fear among the aircraft carrier crew's dependents. Well, I guess Captain Crozier should have known that. Maybe he didn't. In an interesting twist of history, the aircraft carrier's namesake was involved in a similar situation. During the summer of 1898, Colonel Theodore Roosevelt, U.S. Army, was leading the famed Rough Riders in Cuba. The Rough Riders were part of the Army's 5th Corps, garrisoned near Santiago de Cuba. At the time, more than 4,000 of the 5th Corps' 4,270 soldiers were sick with malaria and yellow fever. Many were on the verge of dying. The 8 divisional commanders, including Roosevelt, were convinced that if they remained in Cuba, 5th Corps would be wiped out. The divisional commanders met with Major General William R. Shafter, 5th Corps commander, and requested that 5th Corps immediately redeploy to the United States. While it is unclear how Shafter responded to the request, he was certainly aware that President McKinley wanted to maintain a military presence in Cuba until the United States was able to finish peace negotiations with Spain. Whatever his reaction, the divisional commanders left the meeting compelled to put their request in writing. The writing allegedly fell to Colonel Roosevelt, as he was the lowest-ranking officer among them and the only volunteer, which meant he had the least to lose career-wise. In the event the chain of command was to react negatively to the letter, as documented in Roosevelt's book, The Rough Riders, published in 1899, the letter, known as the Round Robin Letter and signed by all of them, reads as follows. Major General Shafter, Sir, In a meeting of the general and medical officers called by you at the palace this morning, we were all, as you know, unanimous in our views what should be done with the Army. To keep us here in the opinion of every officer commanding a division or brigade will simply involve the destruction of thousands. There is no possible reason for not shipping practically the entire command north at once. Yellow fever cases are very few in the cavalry division, where I command one of the 2 brigades, and not one true case of yellow fever has occurred in this division except among the men sent to the hospital at Siboney, where they have, I believe, contracted it. But in this division there have been 1,500 cases of malarial fever. Hardly a man has yet died from it, but the whole command is so weakened and shattered as to be ripe for dying like rotten sheep when a real yellow fever epidemic, instead of a fake epidemic like the present one, strikes us, as it is bound to do if we stay here at the height of this sickness season, August and the beginning of September. Quarantine against malarial fever is much like quarantining against a toothache. All of us are certain that as soon as the authorities at Washington fully appreciate the condition of the Army, we shall be sent home. If we are kept here, it will in all human possibility mean an appalling disaster, for the surgeons here estimate that over half the Army, if kept here during the sickly season, will die. This is not only terrible from the standpoint of the individual lives lost, but it means ruin from the standpoint of military efficiency of the flower of the American Army, for the great bulk of the regulars are here with you. The sick list, large though it is, exceeding 4,000, affords but a faint index of the debilitation of the Army. Not 20% are fit for active work. 6 weeks on the North Maine coast, for instance, or elsewhere where the yellow fever germ cannot possibly propagate, would make us all fit as fighting cocks, as able as we are, eager to take a leading part in the great campaign against Havana in the fall, even if we are not allowed to try Puerto Rico. We can be moved north, if moved at once, with absolute safety to the country, though, of course, it would have been infinitely better if we had been moved north or to Puerto Rico 2 weeks ago. If there was any object in keeping us here, we would face yellow fever with as much indifference as we faced bullets. But there is no object. The 4 immune regiments ordered here are sufficient to garrison the city and surrounding towns, and there is absolutely nothing for us to do here, and there has not been since the city surrendered. It is impossible to move into the interior. Every shifting of camp doubles the sick rate in our present weakened condition, and anyhow, the interior is rather worse than the coast, as I have found by actual reconnaissance. Our present camps are as healthy as any camp at the end of this island can be. I write only because I cannot see our men, who have fought so bravely and who have endured extreme hardship and danger so uncomplainingly, go to destruction without striving so far as lies in me to avert doom, as fearful as it is unnecessary and undeserved. Yours respectfully, Theodore Roosevelt, Colonel Commanding 2nd Cavalry Brigade. Now I read this, and I can't help but wonder if Captain Crozier also was very familiar with this letter. Roosevelt delivered the letter to Shatner, but presumably not convinced the Corps commander would act on it in a timely fashion. Roosevelt also handed a copy of it to the Associated Press correspondent who was covering the Cuba beat. That correspondent quickly cabled the letter to AP headquarters, and it published nationwide the same day. The public outcry was overwhelming and unanimous in accusing the McKinley administration of not caring about the troops. McKinley summoned his Secretary of War, Russell A. Alger, and vented his fury that the letter was leaked and ordered him to do what he could to make the problem go away. Alger ordered the Navy to send transport ships to retrieve the Fifth Corps from Cuba and the Army to ready facilities at Camp Wyckoff on Long Island to house the stricken soldiers once they arrived back in the United States. Alger demurred when asked by the press whether the leak had caused him to react faster than he otherwise would have. However, he was on record as previously having asserted that no ships were available to bring the Fifth Corps back from Cuba. Now, I read this, and I wonder, I wonder, first of all, how many carrier commanders does the United States Navy have? How many men are qualified to captain a United States aircraft carrier? One of the front lines of our nation's defense? I don't know. But I can't help but, after having read this story in the U.S. Naval Institute, wonder if Captain Crozier wasn't thinking about the very man who his boat was named after when he decided to write a letter. And lest we understand or forget, he did not send it to the Associated Press the way Theodore Roosevelt did. So I love the comments here, because obviously I think the people that read the U.S. Naval Institute website or letters or things know a hell of a lot more than being in the Navy than I do. but I wanted to read a few of these responses. John Condell says, I had 2 command tours, including wartime and counter-piracy deployments, and nothing that I had to deal with approaches the complexity of the COVID-19 situation. I am relatively safe in my home, and despite being practically consumed with the thought of the past 24 hours, I have been unable to imagine being in the captain's shoes, or an SecNav for that matter. This I do know. The COVID-19 virus advances while we assign blame and point fingers. Energy better spent on planning for the very real possibility of a similar event on the rest of the ships in the fleet. Not to mention the families of our sailors, some of whom will likely find themselves under that predicted cases curve. If you are in command today, chances are you will be similarly challenged very soon. How will you respond? On behalf of us graybeards, how can we help? Peter Ellis responds to John Condell and says, spoken like a true CO. I'm a heck of a lot older now and gray too, but I'll troop with you, sir. Semper Fi. And beneath that, William Toady says, sorry, Ward, but I must vehemently disagree. As you know, info regarding the operational status of an aircraft carrier, or a submarine, or a surface combatant for that matter, is classified secret. If a CVN goes offline for any reason, it's classified and is escalated to the highest levels of government to include the president. So to shotgun that kind of information in a letter that's attached to an unclassified email is a security violation of the highest order, which I would have considered offense number 1. Second, there are avenues that any CO should know they can use to escalate, most notably an obscure format known as the naval message. It is understandable that the CO may not have known about naval messages since they are used so infrequently in an era of email. But a naval message would have received much more rapid attention and resulted in much more appropriate reaction from Navy hierarchy than the method he chose. Everybody's email inbox is full, so it takes hours for busy senior leaders to read, let alone respond to, an email. If he had sent an immediate naval message, and especially if he would have made it a personal for, it would have received immediate attention and notice. This option is available to any CO. So he could have sent an immediate personal for naval message to AirPac. He didn't. He could have sent an immediate personal for naval message to Pac Fleet. He didn't. He could have sent an immediate personnel for naval message to CNO. He didn't. Any one of these methods would have been more effective than the method he chose. Instead, he wrote a letter, attached it to an unclassified email, and shotgunned it out to 30 people, including folks who aren't even in the Navy. The letter essentially recommended that the Navy take a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier offline, a presidential decision with significant strategic implications, and one that would have been classified secret if it were done. So was his objective to be effective, or was it to receive national media attention? Heck, the report is that he didn't even walk down the passageway to his aircraft carrier and pound on his admiral's door, his strike group commander, to show his admiral the letter he intended to send out to 30 folks who were not on his ship. But even if he had brought it to his strike group commander into the conversation, shotgunning out a letter that blindsided his chain of command, I consider offense number 2. Unless, of course, he took Theodore Roosevelt's, what Theodore Roosevelt had done, and he took the lesser of two evils, knowing that he had less to lose than his admiral, maybe? And of course, the point was made by acting SecNav that CO misrepresented the facts. Assuming you know more than you really do in any operational situation and going public with misleading information is offense number 4. Oh, wait, I didn't read offense number 3. And if he was surprised that a letter with explosive info like this would leak to a newspaper, he should be dismissed for stupidity or naivete. Offense number 3. To be an effective CO, you must understand how to use the right tools available to accomplish the mission. 2 vignettes are helpful to illustrate. Vignette number 1. Ground Force Commander leads from the front, coordinating maneuver and fires effectively to achieve mission. Commander is brave and effective. Vignette number 2. Ground Force Commander runs over the hill solo, is killed, leaving unit leaderless, without coordinated fires, without effective attack, and fails in mission. Commander is brave, but stupid. COTR was executing Vignette 2, which in my mind becomes offense 5. And that's not the end of it. He has created several negative consequences for his ship that will cause it to suffer some more time. He diverted attention away from the areas in the Navy where there were more serious COVID threats. I can't imagine how he would have reacted if he had been a submarine CO. He created a panic with crew families where there was no serious illnesses aboard. Videos of him leaving the ship gives evidence that he has created a cult of personality that will cause the ship to suffer for some time. It was his intention to help his ship. If it was his intention to help his ship, he erred in every way imaginable. Frankly, this was grandstanding of the highest order. He didn't take action that might have actually been effective. He took action that would get him the maximum press exposure. Well, he got it. It's interesting to me to see so many people who never commanded a warship think he's a hero, while so many people who did command warships see this for what it is. My only surprise is that it took so long for him to be sacked. Captain William J. Tody, USN, retired. And then underneath that, with all due respect, Captain Tody's distinguished record as an officer and truth teller, ProPublica has supplied abundant evidence from the McCain and Fitzgerald incidents to believe a pack fleet operating at wartime tempos with too few ships to sustain such operations has become indifferent to ships-level concerns about material and crew deficiencies, and that its practices have support at the higher levels of the chain of command. While the specific communications options Captain Tody identifies may or may not have been used, it's entirely possible the point was moot because the chain of command was willing to take risks with the health and lives of the crew. The question then would become why, when, as Captain Crozier noted, we are not at war. It is also premature to allege that Captain Crozier created a cult of personality based on the videos we all saw this morning. An alternative explanation is that the crew feels neglected and abandoned by the chain of command. And Brian Alder says, the assumption that we have all the facts, an assumption that could quite easily be false. How do we know that the captain didn't walk down the passage to take the letter to the admiral? There's much we don't know. What I do know is this. Relieving the captain of his command is a PR nightmare, especially during this pandemic, and more so after SecNav lauded him publicly. Do I doubt that he needed to be relieved of command? I think he screwed up badly. Do I think the Navy could have done this differently? Oh yes, they could. Lisa Will writes, amen, they could have done something way different than destroying the ties they had mid-deployment with their captain. They were all happy he did it. And then Michael Dobbs writes, I do not believe there can be much doubt that the families of the TR crew, the Theodore Roosevelt crew, were well aware that COVID-19 was moving its way through the ship. As you well know, sailors now use email and other means of modern communication to remain connected to their families. This is not 1734, where you have to be careful about what you say while having a pint at the wharfside pub. As far as panicking, that would be a personal choice or personal reaction of the family members. I don't think you can lay the emotions of the Theodore Roosevelt's crew family at the feet of the CO. Not that you actually know how the families reacted to the news. As an XO and CO, I never sugar-coated news for families because I assumed they were functioning adults who would process truthful information in their own way. Additionally, I do not believe there was a way to keep this secret long enough to really impact OPSEC one way or another. The news about the number of cases was going to come out. I doubt it was even a secret by the time the CO hit send. I will allow myself the editorial comment that a lot of the military classification system is about protecting political and military leaders from embarrassment as opposed to keeping information from our adversaries. 2. I was fortunate enough to serve as a submarine commanding officer. While I do not know enough of the context to call this CO a hero, I definitely can empathize with him. I also, from personal experience, do not need to stretch my imagination very far to find it plausible that his superiors were in denial or otherwise dragging their feet, especially in this Paul Mill, I think political military environment where bad news is not very welcome. While I never had to go to these extremes, on more than one occasion, I had to take some uncomfortable measures to convince my chain of command that my submarines could not effectively get underway and conduct its mission, despite the promises I'd made to my superiors and the promises they had made to their bosses. On at least 2 occasions, I had to say I was willing to be relieved of command if I was forced to get the ship underway before I thought it was ready. My bosses were pretty good, if not great, but they were not living my reality as an SSBN commander. One Commodore understood. One never forgave me for it. The situation with the Theodore Roosevelt is infinitely more complex than the operational conundrums that I faced. I know of at least one other somewhat successful naval officer, Admiral Stavridis, who has publicly stated his support for this CO. I kind of respect that admiral's judgment as to what constitutes good leadership and command decisions, since he has more than a modicum of peer cred. As for the validity of opinions, I think people can voice an opinion even if they don't serve in command. Pause for gasps. The Navy has to select some officers to serve in command even if none of us were ready for that responsibility. We were just lucky enough to be the ones selected. I think that experience gives us a bit more insight, but I don't believe that makes us omniscient on all naval matters or gives us a lock on understanding military leadership. A bit of humility is perhaps in order, lest we lead others to wonder if we were that toxic know-it-all and one-man show while in command. 3. You are a better man than me, Gunga Din, if you can infer a toxic cult of personality from the videos. Beyond that, I don't think there are many successful COs who are not the center of a cult of personality. The CO is the ship, and the ship is the CO. How can a CO's personality, values, and charisma, or lack thereof, not permeate the ship? Ships are cults. It is just that the cult leaders are fortunately swapped out every 2 to 3 years. Had I personally been in command much past 3 years, I definitely would have become the problem rather than the solution. Again, the ship and environment might have been straight up out of Hearts of Darkness or Apocalypse Now, but how the hell do you know that? How the heck do you know that? My gut feels that the Theodore Roosevelt CO isn't a Scott Waddle, but let's see how he responds to media requests after his firing. As far as his strike group commander, I doubt the CO had to go down the hall and talk to him about the virus moving its way through the ship. At the very least, the strike group commander was on constructive notice that the virus was working its way through the ship. I suspect the CO and strike group commander did have some chats, and perhaps the CO didn't think the strike group commander was taking the matter seriously enough. Who knows? Since strike group commanders have very little short time to make their mark, I can definitely imagine a scenario where one might once again be in denial or otherwise slow to take action that might reduce the chances of climbing above 2 stars somewhere between slim and none. Not an indictment, but a plausible hypothetical. Maybe the strike group commander was influenced by whatever part he had in the rather boneheaded decision to do a port call at sea. I don't understand all this terminology. As someone who has been involved in a couple significant ruin-your-whole-day events at sea, I'm pretty tuned into how facile senior leadership can be at insulating themselves from any blame regarding the steps and decisions that led to a bad event. Big Navy is extremely adroit at identifying and taking out specific targets who tend to wear command stars near their breasts. For many senior military leaders, I'm very sorry to say commanding officers are easily replaceable commodities, even if many of us see command at sea as the pinnacle of naval service. At the end of a glorious day at sea, COs are but pawns in a 3D game of chess played by folks with stars near their collars. This goes on and on and on and on. I will not read more of this because you all get the point. However, I'm going to put this in a... here it is. Here's the link. Here's the link to this Naval Institute article, and all of the responses are very, very interesting. Now, for me, I'm not offering my particular opinion on this other than I would think that COs of American aircraft carriers don't come in bushels. They're not a dime a dozen. And in this particular instance, I just found it very interesting that the CO of the Theodore Roosevelt probably took his cue from Theodore Roosevelt himself. And that's what I thought was really interesting. How stories propagate, how stories can influence, how stories can mean something. And then when your boat is actually named the Theodore Roosevelt, it was kind of nice to think that the commanding officer knew something of history and understood why his own boat was named the Theodore Roosevelt. Was his actions I'm not a naval officer. I've never been under any kind of military discipline. I think my life probably would be more squared away if I was in fact somewhat knowledgeable about the discipline that all of our men and women that serve know. I think I could have probably benefited from some of that in my life. But again, I don't know. I just found that it very interesting. This whole story has developed and how quickly Captain Crozier was removed based on what he did, and finding out that as of today, Captain Crozier does in fact test positive for COVID-19, and as do 137 members of his 4,200 member crew. And again, just a very interesting story I thought that I would share with all of you. What do you guys think? let me jump in and see what you guys are saying right now. Let me go back down to Willow. First of all, no, Calvin Bose is here. Calvin is here. Calvin says, I hope this doesn't happen, but hypothetical. Suppose this virus goes on, and let's say AMC and other major chains went under, and 80% of the theaters are gone. What would happen to movies, for example, the new 007 film? Well, here's the thing. Here's what I think is going to happen. Obviously, it has been reported over the last couple of days. John Campea did his live chat yesterday about this. The dire straits that AMC finds itself in, that it might not be able to make its payments to its creditors and things like that in the next couple of months. I don't think, again, that whether they get government bailout money or the studios themselves for a while prop up the larger theater chains. Look, the theater chains, it's not like there's nothing they can do. You know, their business is to show movies to the public and sell popcorn and soda. That business completely ended. I mean, think about, not only the employees are not working, but the rent on their buildings can't be paid. They can't buy their snacks from their distributors. I mean, it is a disruption that disrupts not just the business itself, but all of the people in the supply chains that service that business. The ripple effect is enormous. And what's going to be very interesting is how we're all going to deal with that. We're hearing stories of landlords who are completely forgiving rent for April and May, for however long this goes on, because ultimately, at some point, that's what's going to have to happen. This is a Thanos-type blip to the economy. And when the economy comes back, and when, now it's very interesting reading on social media, people have been coming after me saying, oh, well, I mean, was this worth stopping the whole economy, and that not as many people have been dying as were forecasted? Well, yes, because action has been taken. We'll see where we're at in 2 weeks or 3 weeks from now. Hopefully we'll go the way of South Korea. But as Captain Crozier knows, there isn't a lot of total faith at the top. We haven't seen it. When we don't have our leadership that is being as effective as they could be in this crisis, states are bidding against one another. One of the really interesting things about this is PPEs and things like that. Masks, they're being made in China. Why are they being made in China? Because we in America, we got rid of our manufacturing base because we can't afford to manufacture things like masks in this country, because we can't pay people what Americans need to make. And it's all very interesting. This whole thing, I think, is laid bare. I mean, I hope after all is said and done that we really start reassessing what it is that's important. And I think, immediately it's going to be very, very interesting to see how all this plays out. But in terms of cinemas, look, I don't think that the studios are going to be able to allow movie theaters to go away. They can't. I mean, as we know, a movie is just not going to make back what it cost on as a pay-per-view premiere on a streaming service. I mean, Artemis Fowl is now going to debut on Disney Plus. Well, Disney Plus only makes money from its subscription base, and this subscription base, a lot of people got their free first years with phone, like Verizon. I think you got free Disney Plus or something like that. How do they make up that shortfall? I mean, it's not having movie theaters is a bad thing for Hollywood. It's a bad thing for Hollywood. And if they all go away, then we're not going to have movies that cost $200 million. You can't afford it. You're going to have to pull back, and you'll be making movies that are $5 million and $10 million and less. You couldn't make a Marvel movie if there's no movie theaters, because there's no way to return that investment, especially if it's not on a streaming service. We'll see what happens. I don't know. Willow sends in a tip and says, do you care about real life canon? Movies like Gladiator and Braveheart are completely historically inaccurate. Chernobyl took quite a few liberties, and it's not just cinema. Shakespeare's Richard III is highly fictionalized and kind of libelous. Well, Willow, once again, a lovely question, a wonderful question. Here's the thing. When you're seeing a movie that is based on a historical event, or based on a true story, or based on someone's life, it's an adaptation. It's like anything else. If you're watching an adaptation of something, of a historical event or someone's life, I understand that by the very act of translating it into a movie is adaptation. Because if you're really going to show someone's life, you'd have to like chronicle every minute of every 24-hour day in order to do somebody's life justice. I mean, William Wallace, was not the hero every moment of every day. I mean, he had to eat, he had to sleep, he had to go to the bathroom. I mean, these are not parts of movies. So I think it's understood that what I think a movie should do, especially of a historical event or something, or one of Shakespeare's plays. I mean, Richard III, it's one person's interpretation of those events or one filmmaker's interpretation of those events. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to put everyday life into a story, into the context of a story. But on the other hand, when you're doing a movie like Braveheart, there are things that you need to, I think, have some kind of fealty to in terms of facts. Like it takes place in Scotland, or that William Wallace and Robert the Bruce might have existed toward the same time or around the same time. I mean, there are things that you have to get right and things that have to be left open to interpretation because you're putting someone's life into narrative terms where you might be compressing 20 years into the span of 2 hours or 3 hours or something. So you then also have to put somebody's life into a narrative, and people's lives aren't narratives. So I think the difference between real life and the canon of real life and say the canon of Star Trek or Star Wars is that Star Trek and Star Wars, their canon is made up to work within the confines of an hour-long show or a movie. They're created within the confines of that drama. So by taking, I think, dramatic liberties with if you're taking dramatic, as there's more and more Star Trek TV shows, as you're taking dramatic liberties with the reality that Star Trek sets up, I don't think it's the same as adapting, because what you're not doing is, for instance, what I really, really can't stand with Star Trek Discovery and now Star Trek Picard is they have created significant others that we didn't know existed. They've done it twice, with Michael Burnham being a stepsister of Spock, even though she was really the ward of Sarek. And then, of course, we have Alton Sung, who is a brother that Data never spoke of. I mean, these kinds of things, to me, like Sybok, a half-brother, that makes sense that I might be able to buy something like that. But in terms of Michael Burnham, what they wanted to do in modern Star Trek is change the character of Spock by doing things like giving him a sister, giving him learning disabilities or whatever, which I think is wrong. That would be like going in and changing a historical character that we know doesn't have a learning disability and giving him a learning disability. I think that's taking your adaptation too far. I think that's taking canon violations or changing things around. I think it's too far. But, again, what a really interesting philosophical question that is. I love that question, and it's something that we can ponder here more and more. I think that that's fascinating. Star Wars Rocks sends in a tip and says, have you heard the news about Logan Williams, the kid who played young Barry on The Flash? Did he pass away? I haven't heard the actual news. I hope not. That would bum me out. Mukbang Reviews sends in a super chat and says, just supporting the machine. The artwork is spectacular. Thanks for reviewing it. It's deliberately kind of slow, but I appreciated its pace. It's funny. I thought it was, to me, I didn't find it slow because, it's pulling you along and it's creating, I think for me, like growing up watching Bergman movies or Tarkovsky, it's not as fast paced as a lot of things, but I still think it cast a spell. I think it's all about the mood, and I think the mood worked really, really well. It's just not it's just different, but I think it's true to itself, which I really, really enjoyed. Stub McShave sends in a tip and says, Simon, I won't pronounce his name correctly because Stubble is telling me how to pronounce it. Simon's last name is pronounced in the following way. The first vowel in the name ah is pronounced similar to the vowel sound in the English word door. Okay, so door, Okay? The last word is a long A sound, similar to the A in the word bar. So, Stuhlenhag? 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 Bar, bar, hog. So, Stuhlenhag? Stuhlenhag? That's the best I can do. Stuhlenhag? Seduce Screening Room sends it out. Everyone's laughing their ass off on me. Seduce Screening Room tips and says, thoughts on the latest Devs and Westworld. Devs got super philosophical with its determinism, free will paradox, and Westworld, I don't like that they're not showing us who's in Charlotte's body. Is this going to be another Men in Black Season 1 reveal? Yeah, first of all, I thought the first season of Westworld was great. I have not caught up with the third season yet, so I can't speak to that. But I think that they made the show convoluted for convolution's sake, and I don't necessarily think it serves their story well. It kind of worked in season 1, but Devs I loved. I thought Devs was fantastic. And when Alison Pill explains what exactly Devs, what they're doing there and what they've actually created, I think it's fantastic. Again, Devs and Tales from the Loop remind me of why I love science fiction. It's exactly the kind of thing. I marvel that both of these shows are actually on TV at the same time. And, in a way, I would love to see a Star Trek show that combines both Devs and Tales from the Loop into something. The problem that I had, I think, ultimately, if I look back at Picard, is it's pulp science fiction. It uses all these pulp science fiction elements, and what it's missing is the philosophy and the introspection of a lot of Star Trek, and especially of the character of Jean-Luc Picard. I mean, if you go watch episodes like The Drumhead, or you go watch episodes like Measure of a Man, where Picard espouses a lot of his own philosophy, I would like to have seen a show about that character later in life, and I don't feel that we got it. But watching both Devs and Tales from the Loop, I really have to say, great science fiction is still alive and well on television. And the fact that we're getting two shows like this running concurrently is amazing. And we're all better off for it. And I really loved, I mean, like you just wrote, Sidhu, I mean, we had a show where two characters were literally sitting at a table discussing free will and determinism. How amazing is that? Again, sci-fi at its finest. I don't know if it's going to stick the landing. We shall see. While I loved Ex Machina, I felt that Annihilation was sort of very muddled in terms of what it was trying to say. And I don't know if I mean, obviously I know it was based on a book, but the first of the Southern Reach trilogy, but it still didn't work for me as much as I wanted it to. But I'll tell you, I'm really loving Devs. Anonymous sends in a tip and says, Rob, check out Minefield's The Art of Jacek Yurka, the fiction of Harlan Ellison. When asked to write an introduction to this amazing collection of art, Ellison said, I've done too many introductions. I'll write a short story for each painting. Oh my God. Okay, that wasn't even on my... So Minefield's The Art of Jacek Yurka, I'll totally get that. I've never heard of that. And how could I have not heard of that? That's amazing. Do It for Cash sent in a tip and said, Crozier did the honorable thing. Sometimes your subordinates are more important than a directive. Well, Do It for Cash, while I agree with that sentiment, in a time of war, maybe that's not the best thing to do. And that, I think, is going to be the eternal question. Certainly it's a question, military discipline is what Star Trek sometimes dealt with. And we've seen it dealt with everything from Paths of Glory all the way through A Few Good Men. It's a question, I think, I don't know. I find it hard to believe that the captain of an aircraft carrier was grandstanding for the press. I think we've seen over the last 3 years in the Trump administration a lot of very decorated military veterans who have decades of service behind them have not exactly been treated well by our current administration for various reasons, and no one is safe. And I think part of the reason that we are in this situation has to do with our commander-in-chief. And there's a level of trust that I think has been eroded away both in our intelligence services and our military services. That is something that is definitely a talk about a threat to operational readiness. Thank God we're not on a wartime footing. But yeah, I think I honestly believe that what I've read, all I've read is what you people have read or what you've seen on the news. Captain Crozier was was looking to thwart this raging pandemic from raging. It's not exactly like you can really quarantine very well on an aircraft carrier. There are 4,000 people, even though the ship is very big, in relatively close quarters, and now 137 members of the crew, including Captain Crozier, have COVID-19. So, anyway. Mukbang Reviews continues and sends in a super chat and says, are we headed toward martial law in NYC? Police are ignoring minor crimes and protecting themselves first. Reminds me of The Siege in 1998. Good movie. I like The Siege. I own The Siege on Blu-ray. I thought it was interesting. I went and saw The Siege again because they had the preview for The Phantom Menace playing in front of it. I don't know if we're heading for martial law, but like New York, like in Italy, New York is I was obviously there in January, and New York is a very social city. People are out on the streets all the time. New Yorkers go out. Even your restaurants are close quarters. It's not surprising to me that the disease took a hold there. And if you look at some of the mortality rates, obviously coming out of Italy, a lot of them are older people with pre-existing conditions. I am confident that with social distancing and what we've done, especially here in California, that by staying away from one another, we will get a handle on this disease. But I don't know if we're going to have martial law. I don't know about that. James B. sent in a super chat and says, hi, Rob. Thanks for your thoughts on my letter the other day. Hearing it read back, I felt I was rambling, so thanks for bearing with me. Cheers. And that was 1 out of 2. He goes on to say, what are you most looking forward to with the new Dune movie? I've read the books and seen the sci-fi TV shows, but not the original film. That's a good question. You know, I think what I'm looking for most, James, is I'm familiar with the story, obviously. I've read the book, I've seen the TV miniseries, and I've seen the movie countless times. What I want to see is I want to see that world come to life. What I want is verisimilitude. I now with the kind of modern visual effects that we have, the fact that we're shooting on location, I'm expecting to see a visually stunning film that evokes a truly futuristic alien world that I've never seen before. I want to believe those sandworms are real. I want to see what an ornithopter looks like with flapping wings. I want to see what the Fremen look like. I want to see what the main city, the capital city on Arrakis looks like. I want to see the Harkonnens and the Atreides, and I want to see all this modern technology, and I want to believe in it. I want to feel as I watched it the same way I felt watching Blade Runner 2049. I want to feel transported to some place that I've never been before, even though I've seen various iterations of the story that unfortunately were fairly limited in scope. And having read the Dune script and having loved what I've read, they really do a good job of dropping us into the world of Arrakis in a way that neither miniseries nor the feature film version did. And I think that's what I'm most excited to see. And I'm very excited to see it because I think it's really, I think it's going to be great. I love the way the script, I mean, we know the story. But I think the way the story is told and the way the story is visualized, I've heard rumors that the movie might get pushed. And it might make sense because as things are moving, if they've got time to, I'm hoping they get time to refine the story even more. It'll be even better. We'll see. Mukbang Review sends in a super chat and said, your live chat may wish for you to contrast loops to Picard or modern Trek. Please make it so. Well, I mean, look, it's totally, well, I mean, I think it's a totally different kind of a show. But what I felt about Tales from the Loop, or what I've watched, I haven't seen it all, is that I had an emotional connection. I had an emotional connection from the first episode. And I was completely engrossed, and I was more than that, the mystery of it all. There is a mystery in the first episode too, there are mysteries as it goes on, and I just felt that it was I felt the show was, it had what, you know what I wanted from Picard that I didn't get at all? I wanted a lyrical part of it. I wanted to feel that there was a lyricism to the story that was being told. That, you know, and here's one of my favorite movies in the world. And it is Sidney Lumet's The Verdict with Paul Newman. It's a legal thriller, and you're basically dealing with a man who's kind of, maybe not the end of his life, but certainly the end of his career. He's sort of burnt out. He's disillusioned. He's an alcoholic. He's basically given up on his life, and he gets a second chance. And I felt that Picard was at odds with itself because it wanted to tell a science fiction adventure story using, let's say, very familiar tropes of today. And I know, I mean, I don't just want to say Firefly or Star Trek Renegades, the fan film, or anything like that, but let's just say very familiar tropes. And what it did was it basically gave us B-level science fiction with an A-level character. And in doing so, it brought our A-level character down into a B movie or B series. I felt what's ironic is I felt like I was watching a syndicated show from the early 90s that was possible because of Next Generation, but didn't hold a candle to what Next Generation was. That's what's so interesting. And there was no lyricism. There was no emotionality, no real emotionality, except there were times, the scene with Riker and Troy and Picard. I like that. But again, a lot of that played on nostalgia, and just I was seeing characters I missed and wanted to see again. What I wanted to see is scenes like that with characters that were new, characters that I didn't know. I would love to have seen characters like Admiral Nechayev. Obviously, she'd retire too, but those kind of interactions that Picard had. And I didn't get that. Whereas Tales from the Loop, from the very beginning, from the opening 5 minutes, you know that you're seeing something that is very beautiful and very lyrical and dare I say it, moving. The first episode alone, when you get to the end, it is a moving bit of television. And I wanted to see more of that from Picard. I want to see more of that from Star Trek. I just don't think the people that are currently in charge, I mean, Michael Chabon certainly, I mean, the guy writes essays that have I felt are lyrical. You know? I mean, you want to read a good book, read his book on manhood. It's terrific. But there was none of that in the show because I don't think that I really don't think that Alex Kurtzman even I mean, who knows? But Alex Kurtzman still he's never written anything that I would consider to be lyrical or something that is really emotionally moving that gets me to my core, that provides that whoosh that I've talked about late. I mean, you know, I'll tell you a moment in Star Trek. I'm not a big fan of Star Trek 3. I've said that a lot. But one of my favorite line deliveries, one of my favorite things any actor has ever said in maybe any movie ever, certainly any science fiction movie, is after Sarek mind melds with Kirk. And he says, "Forgive me, it is not here." And he says, then everything he knows and everything he was is gone. That delivery, Mark Leonard's delivery of that sentiment after he mind melds with Kirk, which I think that mind meld's one of the best Star Trek scenes ever, is in Star Trek 3. I want to feel that. I even just telling you guys this right now, I'm like, I'm feeling that emotion. I love the way he says it, though. That line delivery is so good, and there was nothing. I mean, it's great to see Riker and Troy and hey, we're the old teams back together, and Data sitting with Picard. I just wish it was in service of a story where the whole story was that way, and not just moments where I'm watching peak nostalgia happening and I'm having my heartstrings tugged because I've wanted to see those characters so much again. Anyway, I don't know if that did it, but there you go. Ian sends in a super chat and says, "Hey Rob, what movie are you watching for Elizabeth's tomorrow night?" I don't know. We don't know yet. I told Elizabeth I'd have to decide. There's a few. I don't know yet, but you'll know by 6:00 tonight Pacific time. I promise. Thank you for doing what you're doing every day of the week. Well, Ian, thank you. It's funny. I got slammed pretty hard today on Twitter by somebody, and it's funny. I'm a bloated horse's ass, according to some people on Twitter, and that's fine. I invited that person to come on the show and have a discussion about it. Like, I would rather. I have no problem if somebody hates my guts or thinks I'm a monumental douchebag. I'd love to have those people come on the show and have a conversation. Like, you can say it to me on Twitter. Can't you come on the show and we'll talk about it? I invite anybody who has a dissenting point of view that wants to come on. If you want to come on and be on this show, I have an open invitation to anybody that comes on to the show. I don't know if I'll do it live, but I'll absolutely put it out as a show where we talk. I think it'd be too distracting. I wouldn't want somebody who's not used to coming onto YouTube also deal with the elements in a live show. But I'm happy to do it. I extend an invitation. If you want to come on and argue a point with me, please do so. If you think I'm a bloated horse's ass, please do so. Please come on board, and I'd love to do that. So I'd love to have, or send me a video. I have no problem listening to any kind of criticism as long as you're not like, "Oh, fuck you, you douche." I mean, that's not. I don't need that. But if you want to call me a bloated horse's ass and then back that up with 3 or 4 cogent arguments, happy to do it. Happy to play it. Happy to have you on. So there you go. Bob Quall sends in a tip and says, I would not be shocked if some theater chains are bought up by big dollar streamers. I think there will be a theater streaming partnership someday anyhow. Deluxe packages with higher budget series being premiered on the big screen. A lot of potential. Bob, I think you might be right. I just don't know if owning movie theaters and dealing with the general public on a weekly, daily, hour-by-hour basis is very different than running a streaming service. Just like I don't think theaters and I don't see movie studios wanting to run theaters. The only people that I could think of that might do that would be Disney. Could Disney run a chain of theaters and all they would play is Disney movies? But I don't even think Disney's output could. Well, maybe it could. I mean, who knows? They put movies in the theaters that they're already going to put on their streaming service anyway, so maybe they could make those numbers work. But I don't know if they'd want to do that, but they could. They could. Now, let's see. I got some letters. Got some letters to write, and boy, this first one comes from our own King Waspinator. King Waspinator says, so apparently I'm a fearmonger, which, if you knew me, you'd likely find ironic. Oh, hi, Rob, and all you cherished cherubs of the chat. It's your old pal, King Waspinator. I'm not sure what I'm about to write, so I don't know if it's advisable for you to read it on air. I just called in sick to work, and now I don't know what to do with my time. Oh, I'm going to read it on air. It is advisable. I told my boss I wasn't feeling good and didn't want to have to go walk around in this cold spring rain that currently drapes Austin, but in truth, I'm in a dark mood, and I don't really feel like being in the kitchen all night. So back to the fear-mongering thing. I got a random internet comment accusing me of such, and like any veteran of the internet, I would normally dismiss such commentary with a heavy grain of salt, but this one stuck with me, resonated, gave me pause. I don't want to be panicking people or ruining their day or anything like that. I don't want to be alarmist. However, we're all kind of out of time now, and if there ever was a time to start sounding alarms, it's now. There are just paths of logic I can't seem to match up with many of the things people in various industries and government are telling us. Since you're a film and entertainment guy, pardon me, I'm also part of the Hollywood elite, whatever that is. Everybody I know in Hollywood, even extremely hugely successful people, came from somewhere else. But okay. You are a film and entertainment guy. That is the primary focus of what I have to say here, but the oncoming collapse will cross all sectors eventually. YouTube is all over the place when it comes to the denial, anger, acceptance cycle. On the political channels I watch, by the way, I'm 100% with you. On the political channels I watch, some rather mainstream and professional, I've seen people advocate for open revolts, and I've heard a prominent mathematician say we're going to have to slaughter the upper class again because they've forgotten the guillotine over the centuries since last time. I'm not saying this. Figures you would probably recognize are saying this. This is literally deadly serious, Rob. And there's a lot of resentment out there towards Hollywood and celebrity. And then I look at the film and entertainment section of YouTube, and everyone is the queen of denial. How much of it is strategic, I cannot say. I hear people tell me things like, I'm only half right. But like any good mentat, I can only make predictions as accurate as the data I have access to. There is a reflexive atmosphere of secrecy permeating society, and I, for one, don't have time for that anymore. If I'm to be convinced I'm wrong, I need someone in the know to explain why, with no BS. I think pretty much any and all announcements from this past week about various projects and the general portrayal that everything will be okay will just move all multi-billion-dollar movies back further and further, but they'll still make back their money, don't worry, is one part wishful thinking, another part false front to keep the major investors investing. I will gladly be wrong and take all the abuse I've earned for saying this if I am, but as of now I have zero confidence that Mad Max Furiosa or Picard Season 2 or Obi-Wan the series will ever see the light of day. Notice how it was the largest theater chain to buckle first? Apply that logic to Disney. If the holding company that owns my restaurant decides to close shop, ownership does not default to the management of our sub-company, we will shut it down. Apply that logic to Lucasfilm and Marvel Studios. Television is going to go too as ad revenue dries up, as more people go unemployed. How many will continue to pay for streaming services? What do we do if YouTube is shuttered, Rob? I don't know. For me, I don't know. The brainiacs at MIT say this is going to take 18 months. I don't know if it is actually feasible to restart the economy if we did right now, let alone in mid-2020. Why do I seem to be the only person who is asking these questions? Am I mad? Our whole corner of YouTube has been under a spell, partly cast by the industry to keep the revenue stream flowing as much as possible, and partly cast by the fans themselves, by us all, because no one wants their old life to go away. But there's the trick of it, our old lives. I'm not selling fear to anyone. The fear is already there. Remember the litany against fear, fellow Kwisatz-Haderach? You can't escape your fear until you've faced it and let it through without breaking you. We sci-fi fans are uniquely equipped to survive the great change that has come upon us, and like Bartertown, we will rebuild. All we want is life beyond the Thunderdome. Good luck, friend, and burn this after reading. Well, first of all, King, what a great letter. I think, you're asking what a lot of people are asking. I mean, we've never, certainly in my lifetime, my half century on this planet, I haven't seen literally life come to a grinding halt like this. But I would say Europe in World War II. Life goes on, and human beings are very resilient. And while I think the economy for the next couple months, the economy of the world, remember, it's going, especially for the United States, we're in the midst of it right now. But look at Korea. South Korea went through this. They're coming back. Their economy is moving ahead. It's moving forward. We've had these shutdowns. We'll have to cold start the warp drive. We will get through this. But I think in a way, I choose to look at it this way. Are things going to be dire? Yes. Are people going to be hurting? Yes. I myself wonder, again, our rent, we Elizabeth and I basically live paycheck to paycheck. Her paycheck was completely curtailed. I'm doing as much work as I can. I'm sitting here working on work for the Hills Run Red. Who knows when I'm going to get paid for that? Whenever I've done special features, check this out. Studios, when I worked on the X-Men 2 special features, my budget was $150,000. All right? For everything. That included everything. What I was going to pay myself, what I paid Dave Parker for working on it. And the way they pay you is they pay you half up front and half when you deliver. That's how the studios pay you. That's when we had those kinds of budgets. But so what happened was I had to fly back and forth to Vancouver, and I was paying Dave, and we had to survive on that for months and months. And then it was equipment rentals, and back then I was renting an edit bay from Midtown Edit. A lot of stuff went on. And then what you do is eventually you end up spending more money than you have, and then you get money when you get your final check. Well, after we delivered that disc, after it was delivered, the disc actually came out before I got the money. And I had to float all of these more expenses for 4 months. Well, they don't care. They just assume that if you're a big vendor that you'll, and I didn't, sometimes it was hard. It's really, really hard. So working in the entertainment business, being an independent contractor, sometimes you don't get paid for 90 days. I don't know when I'm going to get paid for the special features I'm doing, because who knows if the disc is going to get replicated and it's going to come out on time. So we don't, and after that, I don't have, like, this is not the only thing I do I have day jobs and work and all that other stuff. So you just don't know. And while the generosity of everybody watching these channels has been tremendous, and I need it, that's why I do these shows. It's work. A lot of people don't understand that, and I find it interesting. Like John Campea, it's a full-time job doing this for him. You can see he spends all of his money on better gear. He pays his employees. I mean, John Campea is running a business on YouTube, and that's what he does. And he puts a lot of time and effort into it. And I would love to have like his equipment. He's got thousands of dollars worth of cameras and lenses, and there's a new tracking shot on his. He spends money on his show. Like, it's a business. A lot of people think maybe we're one step up from homeless people with our little hats out on the side of the road, but there's work involved. Like, I do research. We've got a website that we pay for. I'm not saying, but so I feel your pain, man, and the idea that it's so weird being called a Hollywood elite. Nobody's working in Hollywood. There are people that live paycheck to paycheck, and we're not working, and we don't know when we're going to be working again. I mean, how many months can people survive with no money? I've got a family of 4 here. It's me, Sophie, Zoe, and Elizabeth, and it's crazy. So I feel your pain, but I also know that people have survived far bigger hardships than this. And I think that the economy, once it's turned back on, it'll come on with a vengeance. And I think, you know what? I choose to believe at the end of the day, we're going to come out of this. We're going to be more mindful of the world around us. We will understand what is more at stake. And I hope all of this ultimately will make people, stop and smell the roses. Because you know what? I always say that life's pretty great, especially if you're an imagination connoisseur. I choose to be a chancellor of cheerfulness when I'm on this show. That doesn't mean I'm not dealing every single day with Elizabeth wondering what the hell are we going to do with our lives? How are we going to get by? And I'm like, look, we have to keep going. We have to keep moving forward and pushing through, because really we do all still live in the United States. The ones that are here, the rest of the world, same thing. You live where you live. You've got your neighbors, you've got your friends, you've got the world that you inhabit directly, and all we can do is we can't be defeated by this. It's not like, I mean, think about it. It's not like some giant shard of a comet smashed into the Pacific Ocean and wiped out the Pacific Rim. I mean, we're still here. We've still got power. We've still got relative food. I mean, we might have to go through a world of hurt, and it's not going to be the same as it was, but it'll get back there eventually. And I'm not going to sit there. My job here, look, I delved into this story about Captain Crozier and the USS Theodore Roosevelt because I thought there was a story, and the fact I couldn't help, in my mind, the story was that Captain Crozier took a page from Theodore Roosevelt himself, and that was what guided his actions, as was reported. I like that idea, and as a matter of fact, whether he did what he did, whether because it went against the chain of command, and that's why I wanted to share that the comments, because you were hearing from other naval commanding officers that had diametrically opposed points of view, and I thought it was really, really interesting. And in terms of me, rather than espouse my politics, I had people on Twitter going, Rob, I'm a fan of yours, and I like free enterprise, but I don't like your politics. And I'm like, well, okay, but I figure here's a story that I think that when you look at both sides of it, it's not an easy thing. It's not an easy answer. At first, like, my first impulse would be like, yes, Captain Crozier did the right thing. But on the other hand, if you start going in and thinking about military discipline and the fact that it is secret, like our other captain pointed out, like the operational readiness of a ship is really important in time. And a lot of people were coming at me like, Rob, in times of war, we can't allow our people to know. I mean, the Chinese are mucking about in the South China Sea. And what if if that's true. We don't want, and you never let anyone outside. Look, in The Godfather, what do they tell you? Never let anyone outside the family know what you're thinking. The same is true of the military. Never let anyone outside the military know what you're thinking. Operational readiness at all times. We have to have the semblance that we are a strong fighting force. And if things are bad behind the scenes, we don't want anyone to know because we don't want our enemies to take advantage of that. I totally agree and I totally understand that. But I think it was interesting, and I wanted to tell that story because of the fact that Captain Crozier followed, I think, in the best tradition of leaders of men. Teddy Roosevelt did something. He took one for the chin. He was obviously a volunteer. He wasn't career military, so that's why he did what he did, and he probably saved lives. And I would like to believe that in my own mind, I have no knowledge of this. I don't know Captain Crozier. I don't know anybody who does, but I want to say that I kind of liked what he did. But that's coming from somebody who's not in the military. So this next one comes from Garen Gillum. Hey, Rob and fellow imagination connoisseurs, I wanted to write in about Star Trek Picard. Just kidding. No, let's talk about something else, Rob. You've talked about so many of your favorite films, novels, and comics on the show, and I wanted to share two of my very favorites that are, in this case, both novel series. I haven't heard you talk about these, so perhaps they will be new to you. I know it's a long shot, laugh out loud. Let's get started. You and I share love for I, Claudius and Gladiator, and I suspect for HBO's Rome. So if you haven't read this series, I'm pretty sure it'd be up your alley. One of my all-time favorite series of novels, the Masters of Rome series by Colleen McCullough. Miss McCullough, a former Yale medical school, terrible. I'm sorry, Colleen. I didn't mean that. Miss McCullough, a former Yale medical school neurologist, gained literary fame with her first novel, The Thornbirds. Oh, wow. An international bestseller that was later made into a hugely successful 1983 miniseries of the same title, making moms everywhere swoon. Still to this day. Beginning in 1990, she embarked on a passion project, the aforementioned Masters of Rome series, 7 books in all, titled The First Man in Rome, The Grass Crown, Fortune's Favorite, Caesar's Women, Caesar, The October Horse, and Antony and Cleopatra. These are huge novels all, telling the 100-year story of the fall of the Republic of Rome, beginning with Marius, his epic conflict with Sulla, the rise of Caesar, and ending with Augustus' final victory over Antony and his appointment as the first emperor of Rome. These novels are so epic, covering politics, war, scheming, murder, sex, violence, but balanced with detailed glimpses into everyday ancient Roman life. Beyond the main characters are dozens and dozens of secondary characters and stories about wives, slaves, soldiers, and others. These books will have you lost in a time long past, but will give you an education, I'm serious, about the important period of Roman history. There was talk about McCullough continuing the series, but skipping the Julio-Claudian era, I suspect because Robert Graves covered that period in his novels I, Claudius and Claudius the God, and instead picking up with the so-called 5 Good Emperor period, beginning with Nerva and ending with Marcus Aurelius. But, alas, it was not meant to be. Colleen McCullough suffered from degenerative eye disease and was able to continue writing and died in 2015. But her work and the Masters of Rome shall live on in my imagination. Bro, I am sold. That's catnip to me, man. I'm right on it. Moving on from the Masters of Rome to my favorite guilty pleasure series of science fiction books, the Seafort Saga by David Feintuch. Now, while this series is technically 7 books in all, the first 4 are the best and tell a complete story, and those first 4 books are really what I'm covering here. Although classified as military sci-fi, I would describe the series as a cross between Heinlein's young adult novels and the Horatio Hornblower series, and The Lords of Discipline, which, by the way, I love that movie. Yes, I know how strange that sounds. High-concept sci-fi this series is not, but I love it all the same. It's one of the few series of books that I've reread more than once. Here's the setup. A few hundred years in the future, mankind has seeded colonies in other star systems, and essentially the United Nations Naval Service is the only organization capable and allowed by law to travel between the stars. For the most part, consists of transporting colonists and supplies. The Earth is ruled by a theocratic, very moralist Christian government, and the UNNS is a very strict militaristic extension of the Earth government. Also, the faster than light drive in these books causes a degenerative disease in humans, which requires officers and crew to start their careers young. I mean very young, so they can retire to ground assignments by 30 before their bodies are permanently harmed by space travel. So what do you get when you put those elements together? Teen angst, guilt, harsh discipline, and 18th century naval doctrine translated into a futuristic setting. That then clashes with a violent first contact situation with the large space-going aliens that the humans nickname Fish. The hero of the novels is Nick Seifert, a teenage midshipman of average capabilities who becomes captain of a ship after that first confrontation when the senior line officers are killed. As a midshipman, Seifert is a line officer, whereas the older surviving staff officers, doctors, engineers, etc., are not. Hence, per strict interpretation of naval regulations, Seifert becomes captain. This is followed by a confrontation with human pirates, which is an extremely badass repel borders sequence, and that's just the first half of the first book. If you're looking for guilty pleasure series, I highly recommend the first 4 books of the Seifert saga, namely Midshipman's Hope, Challenger's Hope, Prisoner's Hope, and Fisherman's Hope by David Feintuch, or Tuch, T-U-C-H, Tuchus, David Feintuch. Best, Garen Gillam. Well, Garen, both of these series sound like an epic win for me. I'll jump on both of these. Wow. I love this. This is great stuff. So, heck yeah, count me in. So, thanks for that. This one comes from James Kevins. Greetings, Rob. I've been following Robservations for some months now, but in the last several weeks, as we've all slipped into self-imposed home arrest, I found Burnettwork's content, like Robservations and whining about movies, to be essential viewing. Oh, well, thank you. You've become my daily dose of delight. Thank you for the reminder that better days are coming. And they are. Better days are coming. I've just finished enjoying episode 382, and I had a couple of brief comments. Firstly, on the subject of Star Trek Picard, a frequent discussion I'm hearing is a comparison of the overall darkness in the CBS series and what we've seen in the later seasons of Deep Space Nine. Like you, I agree that the Dominion War is a dark period in Trek canon, but it is actually an exploration of what the best men and women of the Federation can do when confronted with an impossibly dark scenario. 100%, sir. And that's what Deep Space Nine is, and people are making a superficial comparison to Deep Space Nine and Picard and Discovery. Yes, Sisko knows he has lied, he has cheated, and he's been accessory to a murder. These are all things that will gnaw at him for the rest of his life. When the series began, the Bajoran prophets were seen as wormhole aliens, but by the end of the series, I think Sisko did see them as being divine, at least in part. I have often wondered if they took Sisko into the Celestial Temple to help him heal this stain on his soul. In the end, this dark war was resolved not by bombing the Cardassians back to the Stone Age or by driving out the Founders, but rather with a simple act of mercy and healing as Odo rejoined the Great Link to heal them of the disease laying waste to them all. That is 100% right, man. That is the kind of optimism missing from Picard. Secondly, you spoke of the high-quality writing in the books and comics available and wondered why this wasn't being mined as source material for a new Trek series. I've had the pleasure of attending many Star Trek conventions over the years, and at one of them, Jonathan Frakes was doing a Q&A with the crowd. He had earlier done the reading of Peter David's work Imzadi for the audiobook. Someone asked him what he'd thought of the story. His response was that he was absolutely blown away. He said he wondered why Peter David wasn't writing an episode for the show because his work was that good. Finally, you spoke about why actors are not necessarily the best choice to provide writing input on a show's content. I can't speak with any certainty about Next Gen, Voyager, DS9, or Enterprise, but the original series actors seem to be protective of their characters. Again, from the stories I've heard at conventions, we all know that Leonard Nimoy suggested the Vulcan greeting be added to a script. In a similar way, the episode The Enemy Within originally had Spock hit someone over the head to knock him out. Nimoy suggested he should have some more sophisticated way of winning a fight. The neck pinch was improvised on the spot. What I hadn't known was that in the episode The Naked Now, the scene where Spock becomes infected and feels his emotional walls crumbling, so he slips into an empty briefing room reciting math tables or anything to focus his mind, but finally ends up sobbing because he was never able to tell his mother that he loved her. That entire scene was ad-libbed by Nimoy. The original scripted scene wasn't working, and director Mark Daniels trusted Nimoy enough to risk one final shot on Nimoy's improvisation. Now, it doesn't always work. George Takei was convinced the Don't Call Me Tiny shot in Star Trek III would flop. He protested loudly and was amazed when fans cheered that scene in theaters. Here's hoping every imagination connoisseur remains safe and well. Jim Kevins. Well, Jim, what a great letter. Not just because you agree with me. Look, I think your point that you're making about actors is 100%. Look, I love actors. One of the great joys I've had in my life is the few times that I've been afforded working with them. And I'll tell you something. Nobody knows or understands when you're on set better than actors about their character and what they're bringing to it. Now, what actors do is they're in the moment. They're thinking about things in the moment. They're thinking about what is in this scene that's motivating my performance. What actors are not doing is they're not thinking about the overarching story and how those moments would work in, say, this in a 2-hour movie or in a 10-episode series. But actors are very good. That's why I love moments when actors improvise. You know, I've talked about this story a lot, but Patrick Van Horn, who starred in Free Enterprise, there's a scene in Free Enterprise when he's talking to Eric McCormack, who plays Mark, and he's talking about how his friend Rob won't come out and play with him anymore, won't go out and party with him anymore because he's always at home with his girlfriend. And he's amazed that Rob's actually cooking for his girlfriend because Rob doesn't cook normally. And in the scene, we'd shot it, and it was take number 4. It was take number 4 where Patrick Van Horn, who's very funny, and when he wasn't on camera, he was just a funny, witty guy. And you knew that if you ever went out with him on the town, that guy was a lady killer par excellence. I mean, he had a rap and a pitter patter. I mean, that guy was just fun to be around, and it was, you could tell. And so in take 4, he's trying to explain, and he says, he's talking about Rob staying home cooking, and then he completely ad-libbed, like in the moment without missing a beat. He goes, cooking, man, like with the pan and fire. And he did this motion with his hand like it's a pan, and his other hand was churning the fire. I don't know where he came up with that, but he was literally in the moment delivering this monologue, and he just did this thing. Came out of nowhere. Now, I had written the script with Mark. I mean, it's not like the theater where every word is precious. But when an actor does something like that, it was totally real and totally honest and totally in the moment. I laughed out loud behind the monitor as I'm watching him perform. And those are things that you can't, those are things that actors bring to their characters because they're immersed in their character and they really understand. When you have actors that really get it, they really have the ability to understand what's on the page, but they're not just reading their lines. They're inhabiting their lines. And that's why great acting is so much fun to watch. Now, what an actor wants is they want their director to help them craft that performance. You know, they know that the director understands the overarching story. So it's up to the director to either tell an actor to pull back or give more or know what's going on. And actors desperately want that interaction with their director so they know that their performance is going to work in the overall story. The worst thing you can do for an actor is, as a director, is to not have that presence with them, not understand that the performance that they're giving you is meant to be, well, dare I say it, directed and molded and shaped. And that's why I think when people like Leonard Nimoy, you know, when you're an actor trying to think of something, how can you play an emotional beat in a scene? Well, you have to look into something in your own life that you can understand that has happened to you that's kind of similar to what you're trying to play. And that's the memory that you used, or one of the memories that you can use to help you get to where you get into a scene, because you understand how you felt in that moment. So I think that actors are incredibly useful when you're on set crafting those moments. And sometimes they don't understand. Sometimes they don't understand because they feel that, like, don't call me tiny seems, and I understand because that is a pretty, I mean, that could go both ways. So I understand where George Takei would, and that's in a moment where an actor is what you do then is, as a director, you got to put your foot down and you have to say, look, let's do it. If you want to do it without that line, as long as we do it my way and we get the line in first, then we try it your way. And, you know, you get an option, then the actor gets a chance to show you, and he also feels, or she feels, that she or he has been heard. And that's part of what goes on when you are directing. And I think that a great director understands that actors can be used and channeled in that way. And it is a give and take. You are working, after all, with somebody. They're not necessarily just working for you. They're working for the project, and you guys are all trying to make the project the best it can be. It's not necessarily a personal issue. But I think those are great. This is a great, obviously you and I park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay. But yeah, I mean, That's the frustrating part. I mean, why Paramount will adapt Tom Clancy novels? Why won't they adapt a Star Trek novel? There is a stigma. There is a huge stigma, and if I ever put it up, I've been saying this for a year and a half now. Diane Duane's interview, one of my favorite Trek novelists, I interviewed her. She was the first interview and the only interview I've done for this show so far, but I haven't put it up yet. She talks about that. And the people that work in Hollywood, if you're directing multi-million-dollar or $100 million movies, you're not going to go back and adapt a comic book or adapt a novel that's a tie-in novel. Everybody thinks that there's those novels are beneath them, whether they admit it or not. Well, I mean, if you had people like myself, if I was in charge, I'd be like, are you kidding me? I mean, if I was in charge of creating a Star Trek series, like I've told you, I would go to the New Frontier series. There it is. I mean, do you know why The Expanse is so good? Because it's based on a book series. It's all laid out, and the people that are adapting The Expanse loved the book series. Well, what's so funny is Star Trek has all kinds of books, but people don't even think about it because, like, why would we do that? The Marvel Cinematic Universe will adapt comic books, but will somebody working in the Alien franchise go and say, you know, this Alien miniseries is really good, we should adapt this? No, they won't. They won't. But you know what? I'll bet you that if somebody started to do that, but we don't even have executives or producers or things that are even thinking that way. Like in the previous letter, both of those series, that Rome series and that young adult sci-fi series, those sound ripe for adaptation, unless somebody's already bought them. Who knows? But yeah, anyway, love this letter. Thank you for writing in, James Kevins. I love that. James Kevins. How many times do people get that wrong? But thank you for writing in. It was a very nice letter. And look, my job here is not to be overly political. My job here is to be entertaining. That's what I'm doing. I'm entertaining. You know, that's what I'm doing. So I'm glad you feel entertained. Are you not entertained? Speaking of that, you know what pissed me off? As you all know, I like action figures. Big Chief Studios was making Maximus from Gladiator, and they've canceled it. They canceled the figure. I've been waiting for like 2 years. I'm like, where is this figure? I have bootleg figures of Maximus, but I've never had an officially released one. I have one in his gladiator garb, and I have one in his Roman soldier garb from the beginning of the movie. And, you know, I was really looking forward to an officially released one with the likeness right. Very, very disappointed. Anyway, we should have such problems, right? Let's see. Back to, wow, there's all these people writing in here. Mark Evans sends in a tip and said, you wrote about learning the V word here and shared an example of things I suspend to enjoy my love of sci-fi. Here's another. Faster than light visualization. Stars and galaxies will not be streaking by as they are so far away. Why do they stick to this? Am I too picky? No. Okay. One of the things that always bothered me about original Star Trek classic series is the portrayal of warp drive and the way stars move. You're not passing by stars. But I think, you know, that's just like there's sound in space. I mean, the portrayal of actual space travel in any franchise, whether it's Star Trek, whether it's in Star Wars, you're totally right. I just look at it as to me, it's just an affectation of the genre that you have to go with. Because if you would stop and allow that to get in the way, you could never take it at all seriously. I just look at it. Here's how I justify the way warp drive looks in the Star Trek universe. You're warping time and space. And maybe you're seeing the entire infinitude of the universe warping around you, and that's why you get that. But you're absolutely right. None of it makes any sense. You know, that's why, you know, Battlestar Galactica, they jump from place to place. And in transit, you didn't get a lot of that. But I don't think you're too picky at all. I think it's how do you portray faster than light travel, you know? There's the blue and the red shift as well. I don't know how they do it, but you're not wrong. You're not wrong. Jason S. sends in a tip and says, I can see the movie adaptation of Captain Crozier. He slams his fist on the table and shouts and spits, if Hillary can grossly mishandle thousands of classified documents and jeopardize the security of our nation, and I can get away with it, then I can too. Yeah, I don't know about that. I think it's so funny how the current administration never takes, whenever they can take a shot at a previous administration, it's so funny. Like, what does that matter? What's past is prologue. Um, you know, so that's funny. Let's see. Jacopo de Quercia sent in a super chat and said, "Hi, Rob. Speaking as an author and historian, I can say historical canon is quite flexible. What matters more is research, in my humble opinion. Fact is better than fiction." I hope I didn't, Jacopo. I hope I didn't. I know I've butchered your name, but you know what? Thanks for answering or speaking to Willow's chat or her tip. I think that's very interesting. Look, I agree. It's probably just as malleable. I mean, history is written by the winners, I know, and it's always more. I mean, I think about, I spent a lot of time trying to mythologize my own life. When things happen, I might just spend like all day long working on something, but then I'll like, what did I do today? I've leapt beyond, and I've utilized my imagination, and I've created programming that horror fans will enjoy for years to come. I mean, even though basically what I was doing was mixing my pieces and uploading them into a portal, so Scream Factory can put them on which is what I was doing yesterday, which is what I'll do today. But yeah, I think you're right. Fact is better than fiction, and research is key. Claudia sends in a tip and says, "Bonjour, Robert. Willow, what about historical canon? I think this is a good question. For example, the gangs of New York completely rewrote history. Irish gangs in New York were not diverse and started the draft race riot in NYC, but we laud Scorsese for his cinematic brilliance. His story is pure fiction. His story, I get it, his story is pure fiction, but to the dramatization of the Von Trapp's escape from Austria. Similar to the dramatization of the Von Trapp's escape from Austria, but it's not a musical. P.S. I implore everyone to watch Ken Burns' documentary on New York." Yeah, I'll watch anything Ken Burns does. Yeah, I mean, look, I've never taken movies as actual historical fact. Never. Even when I was a kid. As much as I like movies about history, I don't think John Blackthorne, if he came to Japan like we're shown in Shogun, there's a lot of research that James Clavell did, but he's making it up. And I think you have to do that because real life is, first of all, anything that's in it, like I said, in a dramatic context, real life isn't dramatic like that. Moments are. What did Alfred Hitchcock say? That good drama is life with all the dull bits cut out. Most of life is pretty mundane and boring. And that's why while I like historical movies quite a bit, they lead you to do research and figure out more about what really happened. Stub McShave says, when the theaters do open, do you think the audience will gravitate more towards escapism and the fantastical or the realism of everyday stories? You know what I think they're going to want to gravitate toward? Fun. They want to have fun. They want to go out and see, as much as Top Gun 2, Maverick is reaching for verisimilitude with its flying scenes, I hope it's fun. I don't want it to be mired in politics. I think people want to have fun at the movies, and whether the story deals with Black Widow, or, we're going to see Black Widow in November and Top Gun 2 in December. Top Gun 2 is steeped more in the reality of our present-day military, whereas Black Widow is about military tactics applied into a fantastical situation. I think people just want to have fun. I think that's what they're going to want. Everyday life. This has been everyday life. We get tastes of it every day, but I think people are going to want to escape. But ultimately, whether stories are real, if they're based in reality, or they're fictional stories, people just want great stories. Whether you're watching, Lawrence of Arabia and Braveheart and all those things, they have their basis in true stories, but people love them too. And movies, even though they use a real person or a real instance or a historical event, if they're presented in a way that's thrilling and enthralling and fun, people will like those. And that's what I think that they want. I don't necessarily think that people are going to be eager to go see movies like, Moonlight. Maybe they will be. That might be enlightening or fun for some people, but they're going to want to see, I think, just have fun. They're going to want to really enjoy themselves. They want to feel elated and excited and happy and thrilled. So, yeah. Sidhu's Screening Room sends in a tip and said, I just read Dune for the first time. The cast is amazing. With Zimmer on score, I'm only saddened that Deakins isn't DP because Blade Runner 2049 was the most beautiful thing my eyes have ever seen. I get what you meant by Godfather vibes. The world and politics feels very tangible. Yeah, well, I can't wait either. I mean, look, Denis Villeneuve is... I would love to have seen Roger Deakins shoot Dune. I really would, but I don't think that they're going to... I think it's still going to look great. But that's one of the things that I loved about Dune. Dune is... The political intrigue is a big part of that story. And ultimately, if you read more than just the first book, the story of Paul Atreides is... well, let's just say... it doesn't end well. It doesn't end well. So, yeah. Austin Hernandez, my man Austin. What a true leader. Austin sends in a super chat and says, what a true leader. Captain Crozier protected his people, the crew, which the government should have celebrated him and not relieved him of duty. People should always come first. In the end, what do we have but each other? Hey, I completely agree with you. But again, the military chain of command is something that needs to be preserved, obviously. But I would look and see how many of America's very veterans, how have the military men, high-ranking members of the military, been treated by this current administration over the last 5 years, or the last 3 years? It's pretty knowing. Ray Valero sends in a super chat. Ray, of course, sent in, Ray from Chicago, sending in a super chat and says, here's my support, Rob. Stay safe. Absolutely. It was great to play his video yesterday. So that's pretty cool. Mukbang says, just more support. Please promote the comic book store again if we can still make purchases. Thank you. I will always promote comic book stores. As everyone knows, Comic Relief Comics, Jacob Fudge's comic book store, is still out there. Shut down, but he's been getting comics to people all over the country. So if there's back issues that you've wanted, or things, I think you can contact Jacob. I've put his chats around. I know that Paul in Long Beach has that information. You can find him, and I'm sure he will get you and send you whatever comics you need. Comic Relief Comics is, of course, the official comic book store of the Burnettwork and the show Robservations. So, yes, and look, even if you don't want to do that, your local comic book stores need help, too. Maybe place a call and see if any of your comic book stores are delivering, or if there's any way they can send you, if there's back issues you want, or graphic novels, or maybe there's some swag or action figures or something. Make a phone call, see what they can do. I have to tell you, let me just speak quickly to local businesses. So we go to Pet Food Express, which is, yes, it is a premium pet food store. And at Pet Food Express, not only do they have great pet food, organic pet food. Yes, it's expensive. I understand that. But they also have these cool, like do-it-yourself car washes. They have do-it-yourself washes for your dog. You go in there, and it's like $15, and they have multiple shampoos and all the things you need, and they've got these basins where they have dryers and hoses and everything. And we take Gilbert and Tallulah there, and we wash them, and we only use one token, so it's $15 to wash them both, because we wash them both at the same time. Elizabeth and I do. And it's kind of fun going there. Well, they had been open, but they've been closed to the public. But I called them, and they had both curbside service, and I went in and I went online and used their online ordering yesterday and scheduled the delivery between 11 and 2 today. It got here about 1 o'clock. And not only did they send me what I had ordered, I got a handwritten note. You know, they have these cards, and the handwritten note says, thank you for your order. And this is a handwritten note that they sent me. And they said, hope you enjoyed your weekend. Stay safe. Here's an extra treat included. And they sent a bag of freeze-dried lamb treats. Now, yeah, I understand. They're advertising more product that I can buy from them. I get it. But I've been buying from them since we got Gilbert. I've been going there. Never have I had a bad experience from Pet Food Express. They're pet friendly. The dogs like to go and roam around the aisles. Obviously, they're on a leash. We've gone there to give them baths, and I've never had anything but a great experience shopping at Pet Food Express. The employees are great. They all tend to be very happy. And I've never written a Yelp review, but I'll tell you right now, I was very surprised. And the fact that somebody took the time to write a handwritten review was great. And if you're in the Pasadena area, I would like to recommend the Pasadena Pizza Company, which is right down on the corner from where I live, Allen and Corson Street. And they have a great way. You can only go in and pick food up, but they've got a great way. They built this contraption on their their front where you pay for your food if you go in. They slide out your pizza to you, like way out, and you don't have to get anywhere near anyone. Plus, they make great pizzas, so shout out to them. So in addition to comic book stores, Austin Hernandez also sends another super chat and says, I think this is our break from the Oasis, like in Ready Player One. At least once a month, we should shut everything down and spend time with our families. Maybe that's not such a bad idea. Might not be such a bad idea. I don't necessarily disagree with you. Let's see, I have another letter. This comes from Igosa Asula. Hi, Rob. Let us talk about the importance of collecting special edition DVDs and Blu-rays of great movies and TV shows in a civil, cordial, and compassionate way. We, as imagination connoisseurs, really admire and adore great movies and TV shows so much that we usually find special and collector's editions of them on Blu-ray and DVD. Rob, it is important for us to get special edition Blu-rays and DVDs of great movies and shows because we have to maintain the dedication to really understand how great movies and shows are made for the better. For instance, when it comes to great movies like Citizen Kane and Star Wars, along with great shows like Breaking Bad as well as The Mary Tyler Moore Show, we need to have special editions for them. It's great to have them on special edition Blu-ray and DVD because stuff like documentaries, commentaries, along with storyboards, etc. will give us, as imagination connoisseurs, valuable information about movies and shows as a way to show us how they are made in a compelling fashion that covers the genesis all the way down to the completion of the film and TV show, only to really enhance our adoration for them due to how compelling the special features are. Rob, speaking of special features, the Blu-ray and DVD needs to have well-researched and equally well-put-together special features to go along with the great movie and show. I say that because no matter how big or small the DVD or Blu-ray is in terms of special features, if the features themselves are not well put together, then it will not represent the great movie or show well, only to disappoint us imagination connoisseurs, since we need great special editions to go along with great movies and shows. As for me, whether it is DVD along with Blu-ray, I only collect great special editions for great movies and shows because I'm always wanting to know how great movies and shows are made so that I can increase my knowledge of storytelling due to Blu-ray and DVD as far as great special editions are concerned. Rob, let us be real. There are some people that still adore great movies and shows, but do not care about getting special edition Blu-rays and DVDs. Let us defend without fighting. We should disagree with these people because, like I said before, great movies and shows need great special editions on Blu-ray and DVD, but we should understand where they are coming from because they believe that as long as they have the movie and show, that is all that matters at the end of the day for them, and that is understandable. Let me make this point. If a great movie or show is only in a DVD and Blu-ray that has no features in it, then I will still buy it, since I also understand that features will come and go, but the movie will live on forever. Rob, physical media is important, whether it's Blu-ray or DVD, and we, as imagination connoisseurs, should always continue to embrace that no matter what. Thanks for letting us embrace media consumption, my friend. Love, Igosa. Well, what a great sentiment. I mean, look, I was fortunate to get in on the ground floor of making DVD special features and then Blu-ray special features. I'm very fortunate that I've worked on, I don't know, probably 30, and that I'm even now I haven't worked on a DVD special edition since 2014, which was the last one we worked on was Star Trek: The Next Generation. I think it was the All Good Things single disc. We'd finished Enterprise, and that was the last thing we did. That I did, and working on The Hills Run Red has been great because it was footage I was responsible for 12 years ago, and I personally have created about 2.5 hours of material, and Dave Parker has created new material. He's done 3 commentaries, and he's done over an hour of material. So yeah, I believe the real problem with physical media is money. And the fact is, consumers are buying less and less physical media. And when you have streaming services, which didn't exist 10 years ago even, now we've got it all on streaming, and there's just unfortunately no value anymore with special features, I think. I mean, I think that there's always value to the consumer, but even when it was only 20% of the audience anyway. Look, I love special features, and I promise you, even if you don't like The Hills Run Red, if a low-budget horror film that's pretty bloody and all that isn't your bag, I promise you the disc will be worth buying if only for the special features alone, showing how a low-budget horror film is developed and made. So hopefully I will have done right by you. So yeah. But yes, that's I appreciate your sentiment. I still love my physical media. Mukbang Reviews sends in another super chat and says, past Shakespeare, I can't think of someone more productive or consistent than Stephen King. Mr. Mercedes is my book now. Do you have one? Great TV too. Love The Outsider. Reminds me of The Loop. I've loved Stephen King my whole life, literally. Well, not quite. I mean, the first time I had ever heard of Stephen King was I was in Hawaii when I was a kid, and Carrie was playing, and that was the first time I ever heard Stephen King. Like, I read about it. I hadn't seen Carrie because it was rated R. I was way too young, and it was based on a book by Stephen King. I didn't know who Stephen King was, and I think my first experience with Stephen King, reading Stephen King, was the paperback of Night Shift, and then I went back and read. But Stephen King, it's funny you're comparing him to Shakespeare. I mean, there's a lot of people that have written a lot of books. I think, though, what Stephen King and Shakespeare have in common is they were both populist writers of their time. I mean, now we look at Shakespeare's writing as something that wasn't populist, but he was. I mean, he was writing for the masses, as was Stephen King. I'm a huge fan. Do I have... Mr. Mercedes is your book now. My favorite Stephen King book is The Stand. But then again, I've got to say, I mean, I've loved so many of Stephen King's books. The last book I read of his lately that I really loved was Revival. I read The Outsider, which I liked, but the supernatural turn it took, I didn't necessarily buy into it. I understand it, but I didn't buy into it. But Revival was the last book of his that I really, really loved. But I still buy all of his books and read them. The Institute was really disappointing to me. I wanted it to be better. What are you going to do? But again, I mean, I love The Dead Zone. I remember I read Christine when it came out. I think it came out in 83. The movie came out in 83 too, but I read Christine. I want to say it was spring break of 1983. I read that book when I was visiting my grandparents in Palm Springs. I would go down. They lived in Palm Springs for half the year, and I would go visit them. And I remember that was a year I think I was down there by myself for some reason. I don't know if my sister was there. And I would just sit out by the pool and read. It was the best. And I read Christine, which I loved reading Christine. But yeah, I mean, I've loved so many of his books. But great TV too. You like The Outsider. Yeah, there's great. But again, Stephen King movies. I mean, Stand By Me and Shawshank Redemption. I loved Carrie. I loved Misery. I like Brian's Apt Pupil. There's so much. I really like Stephen King a lot, Mukbang. I'm a big fan. Mala sent in a super chat and says, why did the Russos screw up the Hulk in the MCU? Did they? I actually really liked how the Hulk was portrayed in the MCU. It's just, again, you have to adapt comic book characters, and make them work on screen. The Hulk is tough. Admittedly, the Hulk is a character that it's hard to bring verisimilitude to. Very much so. And I thought they did a pretty good job. Like, I really enjoyed what they did. And, as I said, I watched the first half of Endgame the other day just because I was calibrating this new 9.1, the bar that JBL sent me, and I was playing around with it, and I was watching Endgame, and I forgot, man. I love the scene where you meet Professor Hulk. And I thought that was great. I mean, look, is it the Hulk smash? Is it the Hulk? There's so many different iterations of the Hulk. and the Hulk has been pretty good lately too. I like the way Mark Ruffalo is playing the Hulk. I really do. I really did. I enjoy him. I wouldn't say they screwed it up. They did their own interpretation of it. But they didn't. I mean, do you think the Russos screwed up the Hulk with Infinity War and Endgame? I mean, I think they were doing something different. I like what they did. Mark Evans sends in a tip and says, by the way, since I've started watching you, I don't think I've heard you mention the Stargate series. What do you think about it? I loved it. Mark, I have to disappoint you, and I've disappointed many people. I have never watched Stargate, the shows. I saw the movie like 6 times, but I've never seen an episode of Stargate. None of the shows. It is a total black hole in my genre education. At first, I was I was embittered by the fact that Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin were not a part of it. I've always been a fan of theirs. Obvious full disclosure, Dean Devlin makes the Inglorious Trexperts podcast possible. So I'm a huge fan of his, but I've never seen Stargate. I know I should hang my head in shame and watch it, but there's so much of it. Claudia sends in a tip and says, Monsieur Robert, in my fictional biography of you, the notorious RMB, the USNS Comfort is actually sent by the Dharma Initiative to capture you. Your YouTube power surges, EMP pulses directed by Bad Robot to shut your message down. Rob, you will unfortunately spend your year in Swan Station being forced to write episodes of Discovery in which Burnham is Kirk's instructor at Starfleet Academy. Burnham actually created the Kobayashi Maru. Oh, God. Come on, Claudius. That's terrifying. Do you have to do that to me? And on that horrible note, I'm going to bring an end to this episode of Robservations, the show about something. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all for joining me for Robservations episode number 383. Once again, I want to thank everybody that generously supports this channel in every way. Tips, super chats, letters, joining up at the or writing into the website. I love your letters. Keep them coming. And again, I'm trying to get through as many as I can. I've got videos I have to get through. I'm still getting through all that stuff. I haven't forgotten. But I want to thank you all for still being here. I'll keep going. I mean, I've been getting lots of great feedback from everybody, and as long as that continues to be a thing, I will continue to do this. And by the way, if you strenuously object to something I say, please send in a video. Please send in a letter. I will read it. If you want to be critical of me personally, you can be. I welcome you to do so. You can leave comments on these chats on YouTube or write in, and we'll discuss it. I have no problem with that. I want to thank my moderating staff, the great Mayor Mike Bodden, of course. I want to thank Detective Jim Boyers. I want to thank the great Greg Smith up in Olympia, Washington. And I want to thank Jordy Lyons and Louis Yu, because, of course, the moderating staff makes this channel what it is. And I want to thank all of you again for being here. I will be back tomorrow. I assume I'm on the John Campea show. And tomorrow we will be back. I'll be back here. And then also another episode of Whining About Movies. And we will decide what that movie will be in 2 hours by 6 o'clock Pacific time. I will give you the latest movie that we're going to watch for Whining About Movies. I'm going to go back to editing my Sophie Monk piece for the Hills Run Red Blu-ray. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. And remember, every person you meet has a story to tell, even Captain Crozier, that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, as I always say, have a better and have a safe day. I mean that.